location alone, there are inferior films. Films. Sequels suck. Sequels suck. Sequels suck. Films.
Welcome back, movie fans. This is a podcast, Sequels Suck. I'm your host, Cable Brandon Sage, and with me, as always, is the ever reliable Angus Brown. How you going, mate? I believe you've been. I believe you've been busy with some comedy. No? Yes. Yeah. Tell us about that. Tell us.
Look, man, everything's audio now. Everything's podcasts. I'm not leaving my house ever again, I'm afraid. So I've been recording a couple of other podcasts, got side hustles. And I've been working on one that's just come out called The Story Symphony, which is like a horror comedy sci-fi thing narrative podcast where nobody knows what's going on. Each episode is written by a different writer who doesn't know what they're getting until the other writer finishes and then hands it off. So it's like an ongoing evolving thing. And
that sounds like to me like episode 7, 8, 9 of Star Wars with J.J. Abrams, Rian Johnson,
yeah. Kind of is.
At one point, Colin Trevorrow, and then it kind of got changed again.
Yeah. Someone starts it and hands it off, and then someone's like, "Ooh." We don't have any toxic fanboys trying to derail things with the podcast so far. So season 1 was good, went really well. So season 2 has just launched a couple of days ago. I mean, this is a podcast. Who knows when people will listen to this episode, but it's 2022 in June. The first episode of Story Symphony launched in 2022, June 28th, I think. So if you listen right away, it's there. If you listen in 50 years from your bunker underground, eating Soylent Green, the internet probably still exists and you can watch it, listen to it then. And another podcast that hasn't launched yet is a very dumb comedy one that I'm doing about trying to solve the mystery of who started the fire in the Billy Joel song "Who Did Start the Fire." We didn't start the fire. Called "Who Did Start the Fire?" Then
I'm glad you brought that up because I still vividly remember when that song dropped. Again, showing my age. My parents were, I wouldn't say hardcore Billy Joel fans, but fans of Billy Joel. And I still remember the main sort of radio station back in the day in Melbourne played a lot of as soon as anything new of Billy Joel was coming out, it was played quite a bit on radio and, high rotation. And I remember, like really vividly the first time I sort of heard "We Didn't Start the Fire" and just thinking, oh, this is such a different song and really enjoying it. And I still, funnily enough, actually had the CD on the other day because I got tickets for Billy Joel, who's coming out in December. So
congratulations on your second mortgage, because I looked at tickets and boy, does Billy like to charge money.
Yeah. So, don't worry, I'll sit right up the back. But I remember putting it on and my kids sort of commenting and going, kind of knowing it, but then going, hang on, because they're used to the Star Wars version that I think it's Royish Good Looks did on YouTube a few years ago, which is really good as well. So, but I know we've got sort of sidetracked, but "We Didn't Start the Fire." It's a funny one because like I guess I'm the gist of it. I think where you're going with it is an interesting thing to ponder. Like, and I know Ricky Gervais has even brought this up in one of his stand-ups before. He's like, it's not a song; it's just a list. It's not even. He's just reading a list of things that happened and important events, and it's kind of.
There's like a Gregorian chant for a chorus where they just say like the same 5 lines of it. It's a strange one. Yeah, it's very silly. Should be good fun. It's sort of the opposite of this film. That it's a light and breezy, silly thing compared to John Carpenter's The Thing, which is a dark, gritty, brutal.
Which is, I guess we buried the lead a little bit there, that we are talking about the 1982 film, The Thing, which is not a sequel. You may be thinking, you're going, hang on. This podcast is about sequels. Okay, one of the things we did think about a while ago was, yes, we want to do sequels, but I think we can lump in there, a new thing that's actually, no, that's not a new thing, but reboots is a new fashion word for these sort of things too, but also remakes. And I think it's really important to look at The Thing, which is a remake, and they actually remade it somewhat again, or they intended to, and then they decided, no, that's too silly. The Thing is a perfect film, so we're going to do the prequel. And they called it The Thing, which again ties into things that we've talked about with Halloween 2018, and a few of these other movies, Scream, just going with that same title and not differentiating and potentially confusing an audience. I mean, drawing in the new people who don't know the original work, but kind of, yeah, it's a bit convoluted. But anyway, we are talking about the 1982 movie The Thing, which is our first official remake, I think, unless someone, I still know what you did last time it was done before, which I don't think so. You could probably argue there's probably a movie that we have talked about that's kind of been done before and they've ripped it off, but we don't really know about it. So
yeah, definitely not a direct remake, but also that's an interesting thing to jump off in, because it depends on who you talk to, whether or not this film is a remake, because according to John Carpenter, he said he didn't technically remake so the original one is called I think 52. Someone can fact check me, but I think it's 52. Howard Hawks produced The Thing from Another World.
Yes,
the original
correct.
one was, and that was based off a short story written by John Campbell Jr. called Who Goes There?
Yes,
which
correct.
appeared in like a bunch of pulp magazines and stuff. So John Carpenter said that this is not so much a remake of the Howard Hawks produced The Thing from Another World. It's more a revisiting of the short story. And there are differences. Like, you know, the thing in The Thing from Another World doesn't really transform into looking like humans. That's a John Carpenter thing. So it's a remake because it is, I guess, retreading a film. And there are, I mean, you know, the titles, for example, the way that the words "The Thing" burns through the screen, that is directly from The Thing from Another World. And there's lots of stuff that John Carpenter's paying homage to, but it's kind of an interesting one when you're taking a property that's based off a book, you know, where they fall in that remake category. Because obviously something like Halloween, John Carpenter's Halloween, was original idea he came up with. He wrote it with Deborah Hill. They created this thing from nothing together. And then Rob Zombie remade it. That's a straight remake. But is that the same as what John Carpenter's doing? Is this like a subsection of a remake? Is this a readaptation? You know, you can bend your brain to a pretzel, kind of spiraling down this little wormhole.
Yeah, I think it's well, yeah. I mean, I probably don't want to stay on it for too long of the podcast, but you're right. It does. You know, the easy way to say is just it's a flat out remake, but you're right. It doesn't. I think it's an interesting topic you bring up, that if it is from originally a story and they made a movie from that, and they didn't really stick to the book too much, and it's quite different. And again, like you're saying, in 1950s they can only do so much, and they still made this great film. But then someone years later goes, I really love that film, but I want to do my take on it, but I want to make it more accurate to the book. And again, 1982, there was a lot more special effects and stuff that they could do to sort of get it to that point. And the same thing would be again when they revisited The Thing again. And you look at even Star Wars movies with George Lucas wanting to do prequels, because I've got the technology to go back and do the stuff I really wanted to do. I mean, if someone goes back to the source material and improves upon it, or at least makes it closer to the book, and is quite different from the first movie, is it really a remake? Yeah, I mean, it's it's an interesting one. It's
and also now that someone has remade / made a prequel of The Thing, technically this is a sequel now. Like not in the true sense where it was released off the back of another film, but it is. You know, if you want to go chronologically, you can now watch this as part 2 of an ongoing story, which creates a whole other wormhole thing. So it's an interesting, that's why we wanted to talk about on the show, because it is something that it kind of covers a lot of areas that haven't necessarily been covered with other sequels we've discussed so far, but it does still fall into a lot of the same categories, in addition to being a classic horror film, which we love to talk about too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important because I think I'm pretty sure we both really like this film. So, of course we want to talk about it, but I really like The Thing. the prequel, sequel, remake, whatever you want to call it. And I think that's got an interesting backstory too in that pre-production, in that they originally were going to remake this film. And it got to a point where it was like, no, we can't. It's classic. Why would we remake this? We can't make this any better. Hang on. Why? Hang on. We've got a pre-existing idea that we can be the Norwegian camp. Why couldn't we start our movie before the 1982 version and lead into that? And I think that was a really smart move by the creators of that film. And that's definitely a film I want to talk about. And I feel like it's also a film that doesn't get a lot of love from the original The Thing fans so much. But I think there's some really good performance in there. And I think they really nailed making what we see in 1982 they get it to the right place and hit all the right spots for the stuff that happened. So anyway, it is what it is. We can discuss that later.
It's an interesting thing, though, what you're talking about, that it doesn't get a lot of love from fans, and critics didn't like it either, because that's what happened with John Carpenter's The Thing. When this film came out in 1982, it bombed hard. It was a big disaster for John Carpenter's career. It was a big box office thing, and it's all because of fucking E.T. the extraterrestrial. Yeah. Who is
also to blame for Atari, just falling into a pit of
look at
disaster.
How toxic this film is. So for anyone who's not familiar with the backstory or the history of this film, this film came out in 1982 after Steven Spielberg's E.T. was a massive hit, and everyone's like, holy shit, E.T.'s the greatest, we love it. And then John Carpenter's film was the next kind of alien movie to hit cinemas, like the next big, hey, watch an alien on the screen. And people didn't want dark, gritty, scary aliens at that point. They wanted like friendly, you can light up your finger like a big old butt plug. That's the kind of alien we want. And as a result, people hated it. They were in the wrong gear. They're in the wrong frame of mind. It bombed at the box office. The critics just ripped it to shreds. People who went and saw it were like, what the hell is this? It's just this sad, grim, long bummer of a film, which, sidebar, is how I would describe E.T. It is a sad, long bummer of a film. That's not like a joyride of good times. It's a bunch of sad kids being sad and a bunch of adults being mean to them. So that it really bombed. It didn't just affect The Thing, though, because released on the exact same day as The Thing hit cinemas was Blade Runner. Ridley Scott's Blade Runner went into cinemas on the same day. It also bombed because people were like, fuck space being sad. We want cool, fun, good time. We want Mac and me. That's what we want. And the spiral off was John Carpenter got fired off his next film, which was Stephen King's Firestarter adaptation, which got handed off to a nobody. This is his first studio film. The Thing was his first studio film. He was an independent filmmaker, independently backed. Universal were like, hey, come do this film with us. So he did The Thing. It bombed. He was already ready to go and start filming Firestarter after Thing. They were like, we don't think so. Stephen King is too important for us to just hand off to someone who's going to bomb. They gave it to a nobody director. The film was a nothing film that kind of went away and is only really remembered because of a young Drew Barrymore playing Charlie McGee, the Firestarter.
I don't think I've even seen it, but I know pop culturally, I know it's Drew Barrymore. I know that cover, but that's
it. You know the cover. You know Drew Barrymore starts a fire. So John Carpenter needed a gig, and he went to another studio and was immediately handed Stephen King's Christine. So he just went and made another Stephen King film anyway, even though he was
really good too.
And then in 2002, they released a remake of Firestarter with Zac Efron in the lead. It also is a bit of a nothing film, but the score was composed and performed by John Carpenter. So everything comes back around again in the end. It all joins up. So his career didn't suffer that badly, but he's always said like this is his sliding doors moment. If this film was a big hit, he has a very different career to the career that he had. And we would have got very different movies out of him. We would have got to see John Carpenter's remake of the Creature from the Black Lagoon, which I think is one of the all-time great unmade movies. One of the great what ifs. Like, how fucking cool would it be to see him take on a classic Universal horror character? But alas, E.T. fucked that up for the rest of us, and now we're never going to see it.
But I just wonder, when you've got this huge box office juggernaut like like ET, it maybe changes and rewires us to a point that you can't. It's like, well, I don't really want to see another Alien movie, and then I'm hearing it's really dark or it's really gory or it's a downer of a film. Like you're probably not gonna, if you want to see something a bit more upbeat, you're not gonna go see The Thing.
That might be the best like box quote that you could ever put in this movie. If you want to see something a bit more upbeat, you're not going to see The Thing.
And it's true. I think, but is it not true? Like, I think there's times like, you and me might, you do have a day where you can go to a movie and like there's certain movies you want to see. Or actually, no, a better example is if you're at home and you are flicking through streaming services or just looking at your DVD collection. There's some movies you think, I need to watch that, but you're just not in the right mindset. I just want to put something, maybe comedy, just chill out. Like, I really feel like watching The Thing, but I'm just not in the right, like there's just times you just have, and maybe, unfortunately, like you said, the sliding door of moments is that the year it was released, what had come before it, what had smashed the box office, and then people, I don't think even back then, like, I just think we're so conditioned to having movies with happy endings, or at least some sort of resolution as well. And the fact that John Carpenter sort of backed himself in to go, you know what, we're going to have the really somewhat ambiguous yet kind of death of every character and not have the happy ending and have the resolution that most films do have. That's a little bit. That's definitely ballsy for the time.
It seems crazy to me now because, like, looking back on the films that are remembered and are like classic films, when you get to late 70s, early 80s, it was a gritty time in cinema.
Yeah.
Everything was kind of pretty full on, and so not being alive when this was coming out.
Yeah.
Looking back is like, how the hell were Blade Runner and The Thing written off as being like a bit too, like, I get they're grim, but being like too grim and too sad. When now we look back and like, friggin' masterpieces, man. Like, what were people thinking?
I also wonder, and this is just, again, to touch on what you just said, that you and me are both not alive in this time frame, but in that late 60s and 70s when you had the Vietnam War and stuff like that happening, and then you had a lot of disaster films and actually downbeat and I think it's even in it might actually be on the Star Wars one of the documentaries. Is it Empire of, I don't know, it's one of the big documentaries that came out with the first release of the DVD box set, George Lucas and the history of the original trilogy, and it did talk about all these downbeat sort of independent films, but also these disaster films, and everything was sort of on a downward trend. And then it was like Star Wars, it was that first sort of big movie that came out again that was a bit more fun and upbeat and a bit more happy ending and all that stuff. You think about all the other, and even Jaws was 2 years earlier. Again, at the end of the day, that's not a happy film. Like all these sort of disaster and horror movie type things, it was like this 10 years of that stuff. And then maybe the trend was, Star Wars was big, and then ET, and that you had a couple, and you had Empire Strikes Back, which I guess was a bit of a downer of a Star Wars film, but there was still maybe this cycle had changed. So then The Thing and that come out, and it's kind of like, oh, hang on, we're a bit over that. And then you throw in Alien just before that as well. Like, I wonder if that's another thing. People are like, Alien was classic, but it was pretty down. And then you go, well, maybe were people over? I don't know. Again, we weren't alive. Yeah.
We weren't alive, but I'm looking at some of the other like 6 big successful films from 1982. In addition to The Thing and Blade Runner, Poltergeist, that's not like a happy-go-lucky film.
Well, no.
The Dark Crystal is a children's film that is fucking devastating and sad. Creepshow is, a good fun horror time. Fast Times at Ridgemont High is a comedy, but it's a dark comedy. Like, there's some pretty yuck stuff. King of Comedy is a comedy, and that is a very, very dark comedy. What else have you got in here? You've got a lot of great horrors. You've got First Blood. Oh,
wow.
Come on,
there's
man.
a lot of down movies.
That's like a
How
big,
depressing.
well, I know. And maybe that was it. But these are all Diner. Diner is a comedy that's still pretty, it's a bit of a bummer. You know, there's nothing really like full on. Like Grease 2 is like the wackiest thing that I can find that came out in 82. The rest of it is pretty, you know, even the comedies are kind of a bit dark. So that maybe it was not just ET's. I mean, I blame ET, but maybe people were just saturated with things that were a bit grim, and they were ready for a gear change. And ET provided a bit of a gear change, and then every other film was like, no, we're still in gritty, dark mode. And people are like, actually, no, we've seen the light. We need to chill out a bit. Things are heavy enough, man. We got to just be cool. This film has, I think, one of the coolest.
Can I backtrack? When did you first see this film? Can you remember when you first saw it?
I couldn't tell you exactly. I know I saw it on VHS.
Yeah.
Which is going to be somewhere in high school. I'm going to guess like year 8, year 9. So we're talking like 90, 98, 99, somewhere around there. I saw it. Or 97, 98. Somewhere around that. Late 90s, I saw this film on VHS.
I'm glad the first time I saw it was at least on a decent sized television in widescreen, because it was the first release of the DVD. So that would have been 2001-ish. So I would have been about 20. And it was one of those movies, again, it sort of, I'd heard about it, but it sort of slipped under the radar that it just hadn't been something I'd watched, obviously. And I was actually so one of the guys who I met through Bros from Chatflix, our Big Brother podcast, the show that Bros was filming at university, this guy was one of the cameramen, and, you know, he just got chatting and whatever. So we sort of, I guess, bonded a bit when we were doing a lot of that stuff on that TV show. And I used to, you know, drop around his place and this and that. And he had a huge DVD collection like I did, but he seemed to have this sort of more cult movies and stuff like that. And he's like, have you seen The Thing? I'm like, no, The Thing. He's, you know, Kurt Russell. I'm like, no, I've know about it, but I've never. He's, it's classic. You got to watch it. And it was just, yeah, it was the best experience. And I'm like, thank God I wasn't just watching it on a shitty old TV, like I said, VHS. It was like at least DVD and a decent, nice, good sized television. And I was just like, oh my God, I can't believe I haven't watched this movie before. And just like, this is one of the best things I've seen. Like, this is classic 80s film. Like, it's crazy.
See, that's why I liked that I saw it on a shitty, like, big
okay.
box cathode thing on VHS, because it is classic A cinema. And for me, watching it like on this grainy VHS tape, you know, late at night on, I think it was on like a school holidays, and me and some buddies just went to the video store and like, what's this? I don't know. There's a dog on the back cover. It says there's an alien. Kurt Russell, he's cool. Let's go. I think this film was a bit of a victim of 80s VHS mentality, perhaps for my demographic, because I know it was a film that I was keen on renting a bunch of times with my buddies on weekends, and it always got passed over because every time we'd like pick it up and look at it, be like, yeah, aliens, that's pretty cool. And like, I don't know, there's out in the snow would be something a bit weird. But every time someone would check the cast list and be like, there's no chicks in this movie, and they would just pass it because you knew there was zero chance of boob, there was zero chance you're gonna see a hot chick, there wasn't even like one final girl or damsel on the street. You were just gonna get a bunch of dudes in the snow. And people like, my buddy's like, nah. And I'm like, oh, but it could be cool. And they're like, nah, man. And eventually I convinced them, like, oh, it was pretty messed up. I loved it. But it didn't have a high rewatchability factor with some of my friends, because they were like, yeah, but just a bunch of dudes. Whereas I was like, let's watch this again right away. This is so cool. Did you see when that guy's arms went in the chest? Holy shit. So yeah, I think it's a good testament to how good this film is that it is still being spoken about and still beloved, because to bomb at the box office, to not really have the things that hit, you know, hard at home VHS, you know, people were renting Nightmare on Elm Street, Friday the 13th, Halloween, you know, they wanted a killer that you could recognize and you know, Pinhead, someone you could fight against and someone you could talk about. There is no killer that you can recognize or talk about. Every different scene, the thing looks different. So there's no way to
and that's
have
why,
a villain.
like, psychologically, that's why it's such a good film. But I think you're right.
Absolutely.
I think sometimes people, and again, I mean, this is generalization, but I think, you know, when I studied film and television many years ago, you know, the reality was that you're going to have those people, whether it's you and me, and maybe not even really me, but a lot of the guys that help out on Chat Flicks and people that are quite intellectual with their film and the way they study it and the way they watch it and the stuff they consume is at a high level. And then there's the people that they have to dumb down for the general public that just, it's, even the way TV shows used to be written, you couldn't do it too complicated. It had to be certain beats. So people, again, the common denominator that people that watch TV that are a certain socio-economical intellectual standard can understand. And I wonder if that's where the movie struggled a little bit too, because it was such, like you said, there was no Pinhead, there was no Freddy Krueger, there was no definitive villain like the original movie where it was a guy in a suit. I think, being able to track who do I think, a bit like a horror movie, who done it, or like Scream, looking at everyone, red herrings, and who was in the same room as the thing or the dog, and who's been away, who got rid of the blood, like this. Some people just can't follow that shit or just don't feel comfortable with it. So I can understand why it probably didn't hit with a huge audience, but the people that really love their horror and love this kind of genre of film and like the whodunit, love the psychology of it, love this film. So unfortunately, I think maybe it is one of those films that is a victim of, it's just not for your general audience at the end of the day. It's not for, unfortunately, not for, when I say not for everyone, it's probably not for a lot of people, unfortunately. Yeah. And that's another thing. I mean, it's definitely got the cult following. I mean, the documentary, they even sort of talk about, the cult following it has now, and that was probably filmed 20 years ago. So we are talking about this film on its 40th anniversary. On the 20th anniversary, when they released the DVD, they talk about the cult following, which is great, but it's, I guess, didn't help them back then when they needed the box office. And like you said, like John Carpenter needed this success that it deserved, but yeah.
Yeah. It's, I think, like, as a film, it grabs you right off the bat. I'm surprised that at the very least, like you said, the whodunit element didn't get people, because I think this is one of the great openings of just any film. It's up there with, I think, the top 10 greatest cold openings of a film, because you get a spaceship for a second, which you're like, what the hell is going on? But then you cut away from that. Once you're actually in the film, you're straight into a bunch of dudes in a helicopter chasing a dog through the snow and trying to shoot it, which you've got to be insane not to be watching that and not go, the fuck is this? What's happening? What's going on? Like, nobody is watching that and going, not for me. Like, it's so cleverly done to, like, immediately draw you into this world that you're like, oh, okay, we're not going to see the spaceship land. We're not going. Is the spaceship going to crash into the helicopter? What's going on? Like, where do these two things meet? And they don't, because they've already met, and you're in it, and you don't realize as an audience member, this kind of great thing where it's like, as soon as the movie starts, it's too late. Like, as an audience, as soon as we're introduced to the film, it's too late. There is no out for anyone. There is no victory. And it's not until you get to the end that you kind of realize, oh shit, yeah, like this was a done deal from the second the cameras went up on this film. We just didn't know it. We were waiting the whole way to see, like, who was going to be the hero? What was the big reveal? Where was the twist? And it doesn't come. And you're like, oh, and I know for some people that's like a bummer, but for me, it was like, oh my God, he tricked us. He tricked us from the very first shot. We never knew it was all over from the very beginning of this movie, which is it's such a great way to tell a story.
And it's kind of crazy too to think that, I guess, your brain thinks, oh, well, at least initially, oh, well, this UFO or spaceship, comes in at its present day. Well, no, that was thousands of years ago. It's now under ice and it's been excavated. And every time I see that, it still makes me think of the Predator as well.
Yes.
Predator, like sort of that shot,
Every time I watch this movie, I forget there is that shot of the spaceship flying towards Earth at the very beginning, because it's so out of step with everything else that happens in the movie, which again, like, makes sense because it's happening thousands of years beforehand. But it starts, I'm like, why is there a fucking funny little spaceship at the start? Oh yeah, that's right.
I was going to say, I don't know if it
starts proper.
It's not me whether it hasn't aged well, but I don't want to be super critical, but I feel sad because I feel like for me, that effect doesn't look great, and it looks a bit cartoony. But then when you watch the documentary, I believe her name's Susan Turner. I'm going to have a look. I'm going to look it up in there. She did some amazing work on building the actual model for that ship that was used. Putting in the lighting system, building, all the brass pieces and this intricate detail. And the same with some of the final scene with a small, when they scale down some stuff. She did some amazing work. And I sort of think to myself, it's a shame that I just feel like visually on camera, it didn't really come off as well as it probably should have compared to everything else in it. Yeah.
There was like a final fight scene in this movie, a huge final fight scene between McCready and the Thing in like its mega ultimate Thing form that was all done in stop motion animation. And it was, a few seconds of footage, but being stop motion, it took weeks to do. And Carpenter looked at it and was like, nah, I immediately can tell that stop motion compared to the shot before, which is, animatronics and puppetry. So we're just not going to do that. And I wonder what the thought process in the conversation is about keeping that spaceship shot in, because like I said, it doesn't really connect to anything. Like the proper opening of the film with the helicopter and the dog in the snow is such a brilliant opening. It tells you everything you need it to do. The spaceship doesn't come back and connect, in that moment. And the spaceship doesn't even really matter at all. Like, we find out eventually that this is an alien. It's almost better if we don't see that spaceship at the start. So I wonder if that was John Carpenter being like, nah, man, my movie's opening with a fucking spaceship. Or if that was the studio, if that was Universal going, hey, like E.T. has a ship, Han Solo has a ship, even, the Predator has a friggin' ship, in Alien, like there's got to be a spaceship in this movie about aliens, even if you're setting it in Antarctica, there's got to be a spaceship. And if he was kind of forced, he's like, all right, I'll give you a spaceship. And he shows you 10 seconds of spaceship at the start before the credits, and then it's gone. I don't know. It is a weird moment that juts out.
You're right. I mean, if you wanted
a lot
to,
of weird moments.
Yeah, if you want to be ultra picky and if you had to be told, oh, you're gonna re-edit this movie or you have to cut some bits out, that would probably be something, because I agree with you. I think you're setting up with the tagline, John Carpenter's The Thing, and the reveal of that to tell people what you're about to see and that this thing is coming to our planet. So that's the easiest way to show it. But is it needed in hindsight? It's not. You could just totally dump that and just. But I also understand why. I understand why it's there. It makes logical sense. I just think now that, I've probably seen the movie 50 times. I don't know if you need it unless it was a really good effect and it had a little bit more to do with the story or was more narratively driven, but probably don't need it.
I guess the one thing it does do is it gives you a slight feeling of comfort in that, like, particularly for a 1982 audience, like if you have seen E.T., there's a lot of spaceships in that, or if you've seen Star Wars, if you've seen Alien, like the spaceship and Alien going together, when you see a flying saucer like that flying through, I certainly, because I always forget it's there, I always do have this like reminiscent feeling like, oh, okay, we're watching this kind of movie. We're watching this kind of like intergalactic space, flying saucer movie. Are they friendly aliens? Are they scary aliens? But we don't really know, but we're going to see an alien and there's going to be but instead you cut and you're in the snow, which is very foreign feeling for a movie that starts with flying saucer. You never see the spaceship again. And you also never kind of see the alien. Like you don't see the alien in any form. So I guess the one thing that it really does do is it puts you in a mindset that you're going to see a certain kind of movie and then never gives you that movie. So you are never sure what's happening, which is what's going on with the characters, which is kind of a great place for the audience to be. Like, you want your audience to be in the same headspace as your characters so that you can play along. And that's really what happens from that scene. So, John Carpenter knows what he's doing. I'm not going to edit his films for him. I'm just going to see if I can figure out and be as smart as him.
Yes.
And that's the answer that I can come up with.
So I guess the big thing for me, the successful part of this film, we call it John Carpenter's The Thing. And obviously John Carpenter is a big reason for, at least while monetarily didn't make a lot of money, I think the overall success and what people now have come to love about the movie, you can attribute to John Carpenter. But the thing I've always thought is that while they did have their difficulties making this film, and obviously it didn't pay off at the box office, and like you spoke about there, then that sort of, unfortunately, the deemed failure of this movie changed the course of direction for some people after the film. But I think if you look back in hindsight and you give it the movie its proper due, there's some really talented people that came together and worked on this film that make it what it is. And I think you can't underestimate, obviously, John Carpenter again being this, great director and visionary, but the fact that he just was able to bring in people that he trusted and supported, like Rob Bottin, and who was 21 at the time, I think, or 22-ish.
Yeah, and nearly died making this movie. This film nearly killed him.
Yeah, crazy. And just other people, like I said, I touched on Susan Turner, John, I think it was John Lloyd, who is the so John Lloyd, the production designer, and all these other people are, it escapes my brain right now. I've got to think of the guy that does the matte paintings. We'll find his name, and the stuff that he does is fantastic, and he's very famous for doing some amazing stuff in other films, especially a lot of Hitchcock stuff. He did matte paintings, but some of his stuff, and the first time I saw it, until you watch the documentaries, there's some stuff that just is so seamless. It's ridiculous. That
and I guess that's part of what John Carpenter does so well as a director, is he brings together a great crew, but also what he does as a director is he makes it seem easy. He makes everything seem simple, and it's not until you get 20, 30, 40 years down the track and people start obsessing over his works and digging in deep and pulling apart every single frame that you realize how hard it was to make all those scenes that he made look so easy. And the thing is an impossible film to make. It uses practical effects. It was shot on location, not in Antarctica, but out in the middle of the Canadian wilderness in the fucking snow. A huge portion of the budget of this film, like I think it was something like $75,000 in 1982 money on a $20 million film. It wasn't a huge budget. $75,000 was spent just to keep the cast and crew warm, because it was so, like, they were really out in the elements doing this film. And then they were working with puppets and animatronics. There was no CGI. They were making it for real. And they were working with, like you said, like, Rick Bottin, who was so young and got very sick making this movie from the stress, and got ulcers and got all sorts of things. And then you've got Keith David. It's his first feature film. Like, he's a stage actor. He's not a film guy, and he's the second lead. You've got the, I think, sixth choice lead actor in Kurt Russell, who Carpenter loves and has worked with a bunch before, but who he really didn't want to work with on this movie because he didn't want to become known as like a package deal. Like, oh yeah, if you get John Carpenter, you get Kurt Russell. They're one and the same. They've done Elvis together. They've done Escape from New York together. And he was like, yeah, I need a break from Kurt Russell. And he went out and he tried to get Jeff Bridges, and he tried to get Clint Eastwood, and he tried to get a bunch of the big guys from the day. And they were all like, nah, man, we're not doing this. And then eventually he came back because the studio was like, what about Kurt Russell? And he was like, fine, I guess. Kurt Russell. He didn't want Wilford Brimley. He wanted Donald Pleasance. He got Wilford Brimley. Like, a lot of the elements of this film shouldn't have worked. And also, the two biggest things about this movie that I always forget personally, and I'm sure a lot of people forget, when you watch a movie that said John Carpenter's something, John Carpenter's Halloween, John Carpenter's The Fog, John Carpenter's Prince of Darkness, what you're getting is not a film directed by John Carpenter. You're getting a film made by him in the sense that he writes it, he directs it, he produces it, and he scores it, which makes him so unique. He didn't fucking write or score this movie. I always forget that. He just directed it. That was it.
Yeah. And what's crazy, it's funny you bring that up about, especially the scoring part of it, because when you hear it, you just assume it just feels John Carpenter-ish.
Sounds very John Carpenter.
Yeah, and it's kind of like, oh yeah, and you just would just take it for granted that he did it. So
Well, what we have learned in recent years is that he did do a couple of tracks because they realized when they were editing it together that there was a few moments they're like, oh shit, we don't have a score for that. What do we do? And Ennio Morricone did the score. Ennio Morricone famously like would churn out like 20 scores a year. Like this guy was prolific, and he would start scoring movies before the movies were even made. He'd be given like notes by a director and a producer. I'm like, hey, this is what the film's going to be. He's like, nah, I got it. And 99% of the time he got it. And with the thing that was kind of the deal, like he did the score because John Carpenter loves Westerns, and every movie he makes is essentially a Western. If you watch all of his movies and think, I'm going to watch this as a Western, it kind of is a Western, which is really fun. But also, this is the first time he didn't have the time to do it. Like he writes his scores in like 3 days, but he didn't even have that. The studio was like, no, we need the score on this. And he's like, so he got Morricone. And so Morricone kind of did a John Carpenter score and then gave it to John Carpenter. And John Carpenter's like, I'm going to use almost none of this and just cut it all out to have an almost silent score. So the score that's released now, which I think Sacred Bones and Waxwork Records just did a release of the sort of complete edition recently with the quote unquote lost themes, and you can listen to Ennio Morricone score, and there's an extra disc or LP that has John Carpenter's, and they sound like the same guy wrote them. But Morricone had so much music that got left over from the thing that John Carpenter's like, nah, I don't need it. He just kept it and then went up using it on Tarantino's The Hateful Eight. So a bunch of Tarantino's Hateful Eight score is Morricone. But it's all a big sidetrack to say that there's so much of this that shouldn't feel like a John Carpenter film. It shouldn't feel like a good film. It should be a disaster. It's not. Nothing's a disaster.
Can I just quickly go back to the Kurt Russell thing? Now, personally, I think one of the great things about this film is Kurt Russell. I think,
yes,
I've watched that documentary quite a few times. I hadn't watched it probably in a couple of years and chucked it on before this podcast. And it's funny the way you talked about how he was brought on this film, because I feel like in the documentary, John Carpenter speaks about it and Kurt Russell speaks about it. And I don't know necessarily whether it's revisionist history or their version of events is slightly different, but they're not exactly the same either. I think politically, I think what you're saying is true. I think John probably would have loved to have Kurt Russell, but also thought, we've got to have a little bit of separation. Maybe Kurt felt the same way a little bit too. But John was a bit more, Kurt wanted to do it, but I was kind of, we were going through, and then it's a bit of a mishmash, but pretty much I think the story goes, if you piece together what they're saying, was Kurt was there helping John with, I guess, part of the rehearsals and bringing people on.
He helped develop the film, yeah.
Yeah, and then it was like within sort of 3 weeks out from filming, he still hadn't found a McCready or someone he liked, and he was kind of like, oh, Kurt, do you want to do it? Do you reckon you can do it, kind of thing? And it was kind of like, whereas I think John's versions kind of sounds like Kurt was putting his hand up to do it, whereas Kurt's version is more like John's kind of like, I'm running out of time. Do you want to do it? You know the lines, the script.
And he was McCready was the last part cast in this movie. Not that it's a huge cast, but yeah, the last person that they managed to cast in this was Kurt Russell, which I find pretty funny. So no matter whose story is true, I think I'd lean more towards Kurt Russell's version in that. Like, your first big budget studio feature and you're going to cast your lead last. That doesn't happen because you're like, let's see what's going on.
Be right. It probably makes sense that they were trying to go for a Clint Eastwood or whoever else was big at the time that they were looking at, and then it was sort of not working out, and he's kind of like, I kind of need you to come on board. But then I just wonder if with the ensemble, whether because it became Kurt Russell, I wonder if he got a little bit more screen time because he was Kurt Russell as well. Like, I wonder if that changed things, or I wonder if that was always going to be the case if they were able to get like said, Clint Eastwood or someone else that was big at the time.
Nick Nolte, Jeff Bridges, Harrison Ford, and Clint Eastwood were all the people that were like aggressively sought to star in this, and then apparently there was one or two others that were kind of kicked around, and always on the list, but never at the top, was Kurt Russell. So, yeah, I mean, Jeff Bridges did Starman with Carpenter, so we got to see what a Jeff Bridges John Carpenter collaboration looks like. I think maybe like in 1982, Nick Nolte could have been pretty good in this role. Like, that gruff, I don't give a shit, but it's already a pretty nihilistic film. And Nick Nolte in everything he does is a really nihilistic guy. Like everything about him just kind of screams, I don't care if the world ends tomorrow. Whereas Kurt Russell is far more happy-go-lucky and like, nah, I don't care, but I also kind of care. And I just have this rough exterior. So I'm glad we didn't see that. Harrison Ford, I think, would be terrible in this role. I think Kurt Russell somehow being the biggest star in the movie, it never feels like he's the star. It feels like an ensemble film the whole way through. It feels like it is, the crew at the outpost. It's not McCready and the crew at the out. And I don't think Harrison Ford, especially in 1982, could do that. And Clint Eastwood certainly couldn't do that. That movie would be, every scene would be Clint Eastwood kicking in a door and scowling at someone and then like shooting them in the head. And you really wouldn't get to see the other characters much at all. So I think we lucked out as an audience. I think we really lucked out that we got this.
I guess I don't want to totally retread, but you brought up a lot of great points that I wanted to backtrack and sort of put a post-it note on and come back to later. But you talked about Rob Bottin. I always thought it was Bottin. I think it's Bottin, or I don't know. Maybe he just puts a fancy slant on.
If my surname was Bottin, I'd be calling it Bottin as well, because Bottin sounds like bottom. And your whole life, did you say bottom? It's like, no, I said Bottin.
But he seems like a great guy too, and just when he talks on the documentary, he speaks with a lot of passion. He was a big fan of obviously John before, he was able to work with him on The Fog and obviously this movie where he got his real big start. And like you said, he's almost health scared, because I think he says he worked every day for a year and 5 weeks, or a year and something ridiculous at Universal, absurd. And he was pretty much there the whole time, sleeping in the office, this and that, just doing stuff. And you go, that's just crazy. And I think that's the other thing about this movie that's kind of, unusual, and at least for John it was that it was a year and a bit, once you got started, the pre-production, obviously the filming and doing everything and the editing. Yeah, it was one of the longest films he's at the time he'd done, and I think ever did in the end. And I mean, so that's a very time-consuming thing. I think it was great foresight that I think it was John Lloyd that went out location where, like you said, British Columbia, where they went and built the set in the summer. So they were able to build a set in summer on the glacier. So when they came back for winter, it'd be nice and Antarctica looking, which they 100% nailed that. But then obviously then, when they did do some of their stuff back in, I'm assuming California, the interiors, they did some stuff back there. They
refrigerated them down to like 40 degrees Fahrenheit. That was like 100 degrees Fahrenheit outside. And couldn't be in there very long because they were like, it's too cold.
Yeah, it's crazy when you think about it. And again, I guess these are things you take for granted, and why certain films are filmed in a certain way and in certain seasons and times of the year, because that was the other thing I'd forgotten in the documentary. They talk about, like you said, that, they filmed up in British Columbia, it's snow. And that was the other problem, was the cameras and all the equipment, couldn't keep going from hot to cold, but they still had to insulate cameras so they didn't freeze and all this sort of stuff. Geez, they made hard work of it.
Yeah.
And to think that you've done a pretty good film that, again, in hindsight, 40 years on, people look back as a classic, but it to be, like you said, ripped apart by the critics and bomb at the box office, you'd be thinking, geez, that was a long year.
Yeah, it would really break your heart, wouldn't it? Just the talent that's in, like you talked about before, the talent. We talked about a lot of the the behind the scenes stuff, things like map painting and set design and stuff, but also things like Dean Cundy is the director of photography on this.
Yeah.
Who's just one of the greats. Like he's done Jurassic Park and Apollo. He's kind of Spielberg's go-to guy
Back
a
to
lot
the
of the
Future.
time. Yeah, like he's got his eye all over some of the great films. And this film looks beautiful. It's incredibly well shot. You know, to film if you've ever listened to a cinematographer talk in a documentary or in an interview or in a book about shooting, they will tell you like shooting snow is just the absolute worst fucking thing to do. It's so hard because that's the way the sunlight hits it. You can't light it. It melts. It moves. It's just somebody stands in it and your shot is fucked because you can't cover that up. No matter what you do, it looks like somebody stepped in the snow and covered it. So you have to be meticulous, and it looks incredible. Every shot in the snow looks incredible.
Well,
be it location or soundstage, he crushed it.
Well, I was going to say, it's funny to circle back to your Harrison Ford, and maybe he thought after doing Empire in the snow in Norway, he probably thought, "Fuck that, I'm not doing another snow."
Getting that cold
because
it's bullshit.
Well, I was going to say, I from all the stories I ever heard, shooting in Norway and doing the ice stuff for Hoth in Empire Strikes Back, everyone hated it. It was a massive chore. It was a massive ordeal. No one liked it. So I can imagine Harrison Ford going, "Oh yeah, let me show me this thing script." And then, "Oh, we're shooting in British Columbia. You're going to be in the snow in Antarctic." And we were like, "No fucking way." And like you said, I think it's interesting because I know when it came to special effects for Empire Strikes Back in the snow, they had a lot of problems hiding matte lines and that because you're against white backgrounds pretty much. And that's where this movie, I wonder if that ever came up where they just, gave George Lucas a bit of a call or Irving Kershner and just, what do you think? Because I feel like they did a good job here. There's definitely some special effects. You kind of go, "Oh, well, I know it's a special effect," but there's some that are really, really good that I still think hold up really well today. And then, but like you said, snow, that's trying to, like you said, filming snow and, like you said, covering tracks and just, there's a lot of mucking around and with that sort of stuff. And geez, that would be.
Yeah, it's hell. There's also some sneaky, not credited, but superstar behind the scenes action going on. Stan Winston did some of the special effects on this when Bottin or Botine went down hard, but refused to be credited. They were like, "Well, we have to put." He's like, "No, this is Rob Bottin." Like he saw how hard he was working and literally killing stuff. Makes him was like, "Don't you dare put my name on this. It'll overshadow him." And I think he gets like a thanks in the special thanks way down the bottom of the credits, but he refused to be credit. But apparently he had a fairly heavy hand in some of the big scenes.
Yeah, they no, I think the only thing they helped out, they did. I think Stan and his team did. Oh, geez, I should have written this down. I believe some of the dog scene in the dog cages, really at the start.
That's a tough scene. That's a tough scene.
Yeah, so that first scene, I think, like I said, Rob was, I don't know if he'd run out of time or was just working so hard on everything else, he hadn't really worked that one out. And like I said, they were running out of time and he was, like you said, health issues, and that they don't really talk about that too much in the documentary about his health issues, just that he was working flat stick. And then Stan was like happy to come in and help out, give him a chop out. So I believe Stan and his team was sort of did a lot of that. Again, that, the dog cages or the dog kennels scene where the thing becomes, I guess, makes itself known.
Yeah, the first big reveal, which is just a crazy, awesome scene.
But the other thing I'd forgotten about, the other thing I really like is that Rob, and this is going back, I guess, right to what, the start of my conversation was that, obviously, give a lot of props and credit to John Carpenter. It's his film, but I think it was really good that some of the people he brought on were very integral to making this, again, for me, a successful movie that I get to watch. Is Rob actually spoke about like what he would do and how it could change and all these great ideas. And then John's like, "Oh, will you go down and speak to this guy," which I think was Mike Plug, who was a comic book artist as well. And he said, "You go down here, you tell him what you've just told me, that story, and get him to start visually just doing it. And that was the thing. It was like for 2 weeks, Rob was down there telling this story and I guess mapping it out just so they visually started having some ideas of what the thing was going to look like and all these, just crazy ideas and artworks. And it's like, even just that, like him to back in and love what Rob was telling him and say, Rob, will you go tell this guy and get him to visually, draw what you're the story you're talking about. So I thought that's a cool little story too that just shows that, John, I don't know, sometimes with some directors, I feel like they're so egomaniacal that they don't let people, they're very micromanaging and it's all about them and they've got to do the storyboards, they've got to do this, they've got to do that, and other people are there to help them get there but not really do anything and not really have a say. Whereas like John's like, yeah, fuck, go, we're going to make this really cool psychological horror movie, but I need some visual flair. You've got it, you go and do it.
Yeah, he really kind of like he seemed to direct this movie in a different way to a lot of his other films because he was not an egomaniacal, but he was someone who like he had a grip. His movies are called John Carpenter's Halloween, John Carpenter's The Fog, John Carpenter for a reason. He was kind of following that Alfred Hitchcock trend of, the film isn't Psycho, it's Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, it's Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds. And that's really something that John Carpenter seemed to take to heart. But with this one, I don't know if it was because it was his first studio film or maybe he was starting to feel more comfortable, more confident, relaxed. But he really did seem to like let everybody kind of do their thing in a big bad way and kind of go wild with it in a lot of the ways. Even things like collaborating with Kurt Russell on the film prior to him actually being cast, but like bringing in other people, not rewriting the script. I imagine that had he been doing The Thing 5 years earlier, he probably would have rewritten the script from the ground up and, been like, no, this is John Carpenter's The Thing. This is how I want it to go. But no, he doesn't even get an additional, added on and John Carpenter credit in the screenwriting. He didn't take a credit for the score work that he did. He let that go uncredited. He really kind of was like, no, this is going to be a collaborative effort. And it worked. He also like seems pretty happy with the ongoing not expanded universe, but the ongoing like expansion of the idea. In 2002, there was a PlayStation video game also called The Thing, because no one can think of a creative title to call anything, which was an unofficial sequel to the movie. The game is about a group of special ops people going to the outpost to find out what happened. And then, of course, they wind up having to fight the Thing because it's a video game. But Carpenter like heard about it and signed off on it and then played it and was like, yeah, this is the official sequel to the Thing. This is canon. Yeah. This is what happens after the Thing. And there's a couple of other comic books which are kind of connected, and John Carpenter's like, yeah, great, like there's an awesome and he's not always as gregarious with stuff like that. A lot of times, every time he gets interviewed about Halloween, which is a lot, and they're like, what do you think about all these sequels they keep making? And his response is always, well, every time they make one, I get a big fat check, so I think they're great. Like he's very he doesn't give a shit about them. He just wants to get paid. Which is the thing. He says it's his favorite film that he's made. He says in all the interviews when people are like, what's your favorite? He's like, The Thing is my favorite film that I've made. I think it's a great film. I think it's a beautiful film, and it's my favorite. So, which would make maybe you'd think he'd be more protective of it, but he almost seems to be like, no, I'm confident that this movie fucking rocks. So whatever else is going on around this film doesn't really bother me.
Ghosts of Mars didn't rate as his favorite, or I had to throw that in because I know you're not a fan of that.
Oh, that movie it just hurts my brain. What this movie is, though, speaking of, because Ghost of Mars being the unofficial third Escape From film, was meant to be Escape from Mars, and the studio wouldn't let that happen, so it had to become its own thing. But what the thing is a unofficial part of a trilogy that has nothing to do with other Thing movies. This is the first part of John Carpenter's Apocalypse trilogy that he promotes and he supports. This, Prince of Darkness, and Mouth of Madness. He calls these Apocalypse trilogy because they're all films about the end of the world, essentially, which also so is kind of, They Live and Ghosts of Mars and Escape from New York and Escape from LA, and he has a very like ending. But yeah, so this is allegedly a part of the Apocalypse trilogy of those two other films that follow the same, not characters, but same themes and ideas that he was really interested in exploring. So he really lets this film be kind of shared in a way that not a lot of his other films he does, apart from purely financial stuff.
Yeah, look, I'm glad that he rates this as one of his favorites. Because I think it's a shame if he looked back on it negatively because of the experience and it bombed. And because for a long time, like if you in the same sort of sphere of, you see sort of saw Kevin Smith make Clerks, and that was such a big thing, and he got the pressure and a lot of money to do more acts, and that sort of bombed because he was just so foreign to the Hollywood system and all the money all of a sudden and doing it a certain way, and when there's so much money involved, and even then it wasn't that much money, but the pressures and decisions made by other producers and people above you and studios and wanting it a certain way and having actually that was Universal too, but I know I always felt sad because I always liked Mallrats as a movie.
I think it's a great film.
I love Mallrats.
I never understood the rage against it. I like Mallrats.
Yeah,
you can quote me,
but I always felt sorry for Kevin in that for a long time, because it got smashed and it bombed so badly, he took it to heart as a big failure. And for a long time, I think he hated that film. And it's only probably
Jersey Girl.
Yeah, and I think maybe in the last 10, 15 years, he's definitely come around because he realizes there's a lot of people that got introduced, like myself, to his work.
My first Kevin Smith film.
Yeah, through Mallrats. And I think that's great that, it definitely wasn't the first John Carpenter film I'd seen, but it's definitely one of my favorites. And I just think it would be sad if, any bitterness he had from, all the hard work they put in and time and effort for the movie to sort of, end up the way it did, at least initially, for him, that's a bad thought. So if that's true, if I take your word for it, that if that's what he's been saying, that's I love that. I love that he can say it's his favorite movie, and regardless of maybe what had happened at the time, that he can say, it is my favorite.
And I guess in the trajectory of his career, like it is, prior to this, he did Assault on Precinct 13 and Halloween and the TV Elvis movie with Kurt Russell, The Fog, Escape from New York. Like he'd done what are now agreed to be classics, but and also Someone's Watching Me. So he did a couple of TV movies. He did his low budget indie films, which now huge successes, but at the time, he wasn't getting paid for. And The Thing was his first studio movie, and it was a bomb, but it wasn't a bomb when it was being made. So there was plenty of opportunity for it to be great, and it is great. There was no tampering. And then after The Thing, lots of classics, Christine, Starman, Big Trouble in Little China, Prince of Darkness, They Live. But I can see why, as a filmmaker, he would probably feel like that was when things were, their best. It was when he was making it, it was pre-negative criticism of it. It was realizing the studio system is a nightmare to try and negotiate. It was the weight of expectation, like, will he bounce back from this? What's going to happen? What's going on? And it was ever having any kind of mark against your name. When prior to that, everything was either this is friggin' amazing, we love this guy, or hey, this guy shows a lot of potential. It was never like, whereas this, people like, this is fucking crap, this is the worst, this sucks. He's an interesting cat, given that we're talking about this film because it is a remake and also not a sequel, but a prequel was made of it, which made it a sequel, and then also has a video game sequel and blah, 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 blah. He's an interesting cat to look at because when you look at his filmography as a director, remakes are all over him in both directions. So you look at the stuff he's done: Assault on Precinct 13, remade; Halloween, remade; Elvis, I mean, he's a person, not a movie. The Fog, remade. Escape from New York, forever being touted as about to be remade. The Thing is a remake. Big Trouble in Little China. They've been promising for about 8 years now that it's getting remade with The Rock in the lead role.
Oh my God, really? Wow.
Yeah. They Live, promising to be remade as well. Village of the Damned is a remake. Like he's in it. Like he's in that remake world, despite only having one sequel to his direct credit. You know, the sequels of the other franchises have nothing to do with him, but he did make his own sequel, Escape from LA. But I think he's a good one to talk to as our first talk about as our first film talking about remakes, because remakes are a very specific thing to cinema. You know, people don't remake albums, people don't remake books, people don't remake art. You know, if you do that in any other medium, it's called a forgery, and you get in trouble.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
You're like, what? Like, here's my copy of The Wind in the Willows. It's like, you didn't write that. It's like, I did. I rewrote it. It's like, no, that's you forged it. Yeah.
I did it in Aussie slang now, so it's a new version.
Here's the Mona Lisa. It's like, no, that's a forgery. Whereas with film, like remaking film, it's a legitimate expression in this medium, and he's never shied away from it, either receiving remakes of his work or doing remakes of other people's work. You know, all with varying degrees of success and largely failure. I would say in all the films that have been remakes of his movies, or all the films he has remade. The Thing is really the only one that works in John Carpenter's filmography, but it is a good jumping off point for future discussions we have about remakes, because he's he lives in that world.
Yeah, really, it's a bit like Mark Wahlberg. He's the king of actually featuring in remakes.
Oh, man,
that's a whole other question.
That's a whole other question. He loves a pre-existing property.
Well, I just think they just ask him to do it. He's probably executive producer on the last couple he's probably been in now, but just off the top
he wants
of
a
my
guarantee.
Head.
Wahlberg wants a guarantee when he signs on.
Well, he was in Planet of the Apes. That was a remake. He was in The Italian Job, a remake. He was in The Truth About Charlie, which was a remake of Charade. And there's like probably another 2 or 3 other ones. It's sort of crazy. And also, Village of the Dam is another interesting. Now that we bring up John Carpenter, is that was actually Wes Craven. That was going to be a Wes Craven film as well. I think we have spoken about that potentially in another episode. But you're right. I mean, if you look at everything, like a lot of the movies he's been involved with are either about to be remade or been remade, or he's sort of done a version of. And you know what surprised me? I wouldn't say I'm either a huge Carpenter fan or not, but I'm surprised at how many of these films I've actually got on Blu-ray or 4K, which is quite a few of them.
I am a big John Carpenter fan. I'll say that.
I got Halloween, probably in a few different versions. The Fog, Escape from New York, The Thing. I've probably got a couple of different versions of The Thing. I've got Christine, Big Trouble in China, Prince of Darkness, They Live. Memoirs of an Invisible Man. I haven't watched in a long time, and I really need to watch that.
You should rewatch it, but you shouldn't buy it on Blu-ray or 4K, because once you rewatch it, you'll be like, I probably don't need to rewatch this for another 10 years. But I like it. I like Memoirs of an Invisible Man.
You want to hear something funny? I actually do have Vampires and Ghosts of Mars on disc as well.
You know, Vampires, fine. Ghosts of Mars, that's an interesting. That's an interesting kettle of fish.
Yeah. Anyway.
So I think overall, it's probably pretty clear that we both think this film is great. We haven't talked heaps about the on-camera cast, but I mean, most of them are famous and or disappear pretty quickly in this movie and are not pretty famous. But
I would say
Wilford Brimley, obviously classic actor, a crazy dude, but he's in there. Donald Moffat is just a staple of cinema for so many years. He's incredible. Keith David, as we said, first film, but went on to become a big deal. Adrienne Barbeau gets an uncredited cameo in this film as the voice of the computer.
Only female, pretty much.
Only female voice.
Well, I was going. Okay, now you did touch on it, and that was again another great thing you brought up. I was going to circle back to now. I guess one of the things that's a bit of a controversy about this film, or it was at least brought up back in the time, was an all-male cast. John has, at least in the documentary, said that he understood realistically at an outpost like this, you'd probably have a couple of females scientists there as well. But he just sort of just had this feeling he wanted to just make it just all male outpost for whatever reason. But I feel like there was some sort of commentary at the time that it was a bit like, oh, well, this all male film. And then it, I guess, ties back to you and your friends making that decision to hire the film or not having any females into it. Do you think that was potentially another mistake when it comes to box office and drawing people in to watch it?
No, I don't, because I think you look at, like, particularly in the 80s, majority of these kind of films, at least like action, horror, thriller things, the poster is going to be a dude. It's going to be Arnold Schwarzenegger. It's going to be Stallone. It's going to be, I don't know, Van Damme. It's going to be someone, it's going to be a jacked dude who looks sweaty with a red and purple background behind him. I don't think it necessarily affected the box office response or the box office dollar not having. I think it potentially affected the VHS dollar because you couldn't put a picture of a woman on the box. Even like, there's plenty of films where you get tricked by, you think it's going to be a really scary horror film because on the box they put like one image of something that looks like, that looks messed up. And it turns out that's the only time something scary happens the whole movie. Or they'll put a beautiful woman on the cover because they know that this movie's shooting for like the 16 to 28-year-old male market. But that beautiful woman pops up in like one moment of one scene. Like I think on the National Lampoon's Vacation box, the woman driving in the red car is like half of the back of the VHS. And,
that doesn't surprise me.
Yeah, and you look at it and you're like, she's pretty hot. And then you watch the movie and like, that's it. Now it's just a guy with his family in a car. So you couldn't do that. You couldn't trick that. I do think from a story point of view, from a creativity point of view, from a common sense point of view, what makes this film work is that it is an all-male cast, not because that's a good thing or that's because of the thing that you want in cinema, but because of the situation that it is. As soon as you introduce female characters, you introduce common sense and you introduce reason and you introduce empathy. And I'm not saying this to be sexist, like men aren't empathetic and men aren't common sense, but what I am saying is in heightened situations like this
like
film,
this,
on camera, as an audience, we are trained to believe and feel certain things about characters on camera. Whether or not they apply in real life is not what I'm saying. But for us to like get on board with how quickly the wheels fall off in this and how like, the characters like Gary, the military man constantly like with the gun, like I will maintain order here with a gun. And McCready and Childs are running around with fucking flamethrowers, 2 minutes after they find out this thing's there. And everybody immediately is like, I don't trust you. But no one is talking to each other. And no one is trying to, common sense things go out the window. And I think that if you introduce female characters and a 1982 audience, and I'm talking this about in the filter of when this film was released, a 1982 audience is expecting the female character to either be the sex symbol who's there to, get railed by Kurt Russell in the first 15 minutes of the film and then not do much else, like a Bond girl, or is there to be the voice of reason and to be the compassionate, empathetic mother figure. And then I think not having that there for 1982 for the thing in 1982 works. I think the prequel / remake having a lead character be a female character, genius. That's exactly what you want when you're making a movie in 2011. You don't want an all dude cast. Doesn't work anymore. 1982, I think it really helps the film and it really sells it because there is no distraction. There is no, again, like I said, there is no hope. I think if you introduce female characters, you introduce hope. I think there is no hope in this movie, so you don't have any hopeful characters.
Yeah, it would have been weird having a movie where you see them all pretty much die, including females. I don't know. It sounds weird to say that because we see horror movies where a lot of females die as many males. But I don't know if you have that couple of female characters. I'm not sure.
Well, I think it would be weird, particularly, someone like Kurt Russell. Like we expect as an audience, if Kurt Russell is in a situation where there is a lot of danger and there is a female character, that he's going to protect the female character, because that's what Kurt Russell does in action movies. But no one in this movie is trying to help anyone else. They're only trying to help themselves. It's purely about survival. It's purely about, like, can I trust you, or do I need to shoot you in the head? So to add that element, I think would trick your audience, or would lead your audience in a stray, and not in a good way, like the spaceship that we talked about at the top of the episode. It would leave your audience being like, Kurt Russell's a dick. He didn't even try to help that woman. Like, he just kind of pushed her in the snow because he didn't trust her. What a bar. Where it was, when he's got a flamethrower trained on Child, you're like, hey, yeah, either one of you could be the thing. I don't know, man. I don't know what's going on. I'm as confused as you. What do you think about the ambiguity of the ending? Because that's the big ongoing controversy of this film. That's the thing that people always come back to. They either love or they hate. It's a real strong thing. How do you feel about it?
I love it. I remember the first time seeing it, I remember thinking, I think the first time I watched it, the way my brain analyzed it was that they were somehow hoping that they were going to survive, but with that realization too, they might not. They might freeze there. But I guess, my brain even back then was trained to, and maybe I hadn't seen enough really dark movies which had the sort of unhappy ending. Like, the problem is, I would say a lot of movies I'd probably seen to that point had those dark, sort of almost unhappy endings, but then the happy ending was tacked on by the Hollywood executive after preview screenings. Oh, I can't have it. So my brain, I just feel like the first time I saw it, I felt like they survived, or in my brain, I thought they survived. And then obviously in subsequent viewings, it's like, oh no, they know they're going to die, or they know they can't let that get back to the mainland. So they've got to make sure they die out there with it, kind of thing. So I've always taken it as, well, we can't let it get out. So we're dying here as well. Like, it's, it is what it is.
Do you think one or both of them are the thing at the end of the film?
Oh, that's the other. I feel like one of them is at the end.
Because there's a theory that goes around that has been gaining momentum in recent years, that Childs is the thing at the end, because, well, there's two things. One, when, like, they breathe, no air is seen, and because they're in the cold, you should be seeing their breath, which means he's not really breathing, he's just mimicking what a human does. But the other theory is, the reason McCready laughs at the end is because he hands him the bottle, and Childs swigs the bottle, and McCready starts laughing. And the theory is that bottle is actually filled with gasoline because it's a Molotov cocktail. And because the thing doesn't know what alcohol is supposed to taste like, it just drinks it like it would presume a human would. And McCready's like, yeah, you're the thing. You piece of shit. The other theory that goes around is that they're both the thing, and that's why neither of them really have any visible breath at the end. And McCready laughs because the thing doesn't really know, like, how to behave as a human, so he just laughs because, like, oh, well, that's what I saw a human do. John Carpenter has stated multiple times they are both human at the end of the film, but the reason that he liked that ending is because by the time it gets to the end, by the time McCready actually killed it, he killed the thing and he won. But they're so paranoid, and they're so twisted up in fear, and they're so twisted up in not trusting anyone, that when they realize there's two left, it dooms them, because it's like, well, even though we've won, we can't accept that we've won.
Yeah.
So we're going to sit here and either kill each other or freeze to death. And again, like the video game that I mentioned, that according to John Carpenter is canon, in the video game, when the army people arrive, McCready and Childs are alive and are proven to be human. And that's kind of the end of that, and the game moves on. There is also the Hollywood ending that you talked about. It was filmed, but thankfully the studio never tacked it on. I don't know how the hell he got away with this. In the Universal Studios feature film, the first time that this guy's been given a studio picture, they got him to film the happy ending, and they didn't make him tack it on, where Childs is the thing, McCready isn't, And the final scene is McCready like in a hospital lab somewhere, and they test his blood, and his blood is human, and he's okay, he's human, and he's made it. And you're like, oh my God, like the hero survived. What a shit ending to this movie that would be.
Yeah,
like
100%.
to be slapped over the face with it and be like, oh, like I know it sounds like a bit of a stretch or a long bow to draw, but I think this ending is great because it's up there with a lot of like Shakespeare's works, like Macbeth. You know, with 400 and something years later, we're still studying Macbeth and talking about Macbeth and reproducing. You know, the Joel Cohen just made a film Macbeth because there's no easy answers in that. You know, you watch that film or those play or read that text 100 times, and every time you're like, oh, I think maybe like the witches might be on the right track, and Macbeth's the evil one. And then you read it again, you're like, oh, Macbeth, he's a good guy, he's just cursed. And you read again, you're like, oh no, he's a fucking psychopath. I think that's what the ending of the thing is. You know, we can watch this movie. Like, I think when we agreed that we were going to do this film next, you said in the chat, it's like, all right, I'm going to go watch it for the 77th time, which may have been a joke, but which may also be legit because I don't know how many times I've seen the thing. But every time, you know, when I get to that final scene, I'm like, even with John Carpenter being like, they're both human, like, all right, but like me watching this as an audience member who doesn't know you, John Carpenter, just watching this story, I'm like, this could be anything.
Oh,
And
100%.
Every time I watch it, I'm like, I don't know. I love it.
I think that's what works the ending too, is because there's so much ambiguity about the whole film and at what point has someone become the thing. You know, we see Clark that we kind of think, you know, he's such the red herring and he was around the dog. He's the most likely to have been the thing.
Yeah, it's got to be him.
And then they shoot him in the head and he's not the thing. It's just crazy. Just paranoia. And then to have that kind of ending. I mean, I could have almost lived a little bit with, like we're saying, like, I think the original or the tacked on potential happy ending they were going to have was him maybe, like you said, being picked up by the army, getting flown away, and then he's back in some sort of hospital office getting tested. I could have almost lived with him even maybe being picked up or survived and flying off, and then ending there with us not knowing if he's the thing or not, and that kind of being ambiguous as well. But I do love the ending because sometimes it's good to have a movie that just doesn't have a sequel and doesn't have a follow-up and you don't really know, and it's your own interpretation. Like, funnily enough, another movie like you had mentioned before that came out this same year, Blade Runner, being very ambiguous ending, and a lot of debate over the years of whether Deckard was a replicant or not. I mean, sometimes it's good to just have that sort of fun sort of, you know, and then sometimes the director, when they come out every time they interview, like, oh, well, and they'll say one thing one year and the next year they go, oh, well, I filmed it this way because, I love the ending. I mean, thanks for asking. I think it's
incredible.
Yeah, it's great. It's great. Should we talk about our good, bad, and ugly?
Yeah, I think we should, man.
You got a good?
Yeah. I think the good has to be the use of practical effects.
Yep.
I think for me personally, it has to be, especially when you watch the 2011 prequel remake, where weirdly, and I mean, we'll have to talk about this on a future episode, but weirdly, they filmed a bunch of that film with practical effects, and the studio made them go back and redo it with CGI. It's like, no, it doesn't look cool or slick enough. The time, the effort, the energy, the stress, like we said a couple of times, it nearly killed Botine. You know, it really was a fucking hard thing to do, to create this monster and to create so many versions of this monster and create such iconic things, you know, the head coming off and growing legs, and which, you know, leads to one of the, if not the greatest lines in the film, "You got to be fucking kidding me," from Kurt Russell, which is just great. The paddles on the chest that go into the chest, and the arm get bit off, you know, which they found a double amputee who they could use for that shot, so it looked authentic. Like, all of these things, as an audience, we have the benefit of not having to think about how hard that was to pull off.
Yeah.
But, you know, when we're 40 years down the track and we're still pulling this part of the film, the special effects in this film are just fucking phenomenal. Like you watch any monster movie or horror movie today, you're not getting that. Even from people who really want to do it and try, because they're just not going to be given the time or the budget to really pull that off. It will not happen. until someone like Christopher Nolan's like, I'm going to make a full-on 80s gore horror. No studio is going to let any director now take that time and money to create practical effects like that. And we didn't know how good we had it in 1982. So that has to be my good in this film. What about you?
Yeah, mine are it's probably almost the same. I think the practical effects now, I think there's probably the odd effect that maybe people would see now and go, oh, it's kind of aged, because obviously the technology's got a lot better, but there's still something charming about it, if that makes any sense. And I think, like Charles' head coming off, and like you said, like, and I think, John Carpenter says it in the documentary, that, he was still a bit worried, oh, these effects going to look good. We don't want to be laughed at. We want it to be legitimate. And then when the first time he saw the head on the ground and then slinking away, and then the legs coming out and they're crawling away, and he's like, oh no, I'm fine. We're going to be fine, kind of thing. And that whole scene's amazing. I love the blood testing scene. That is so good. And then obviously the escalation of everything that happens there. Just, there's so much about this movie. But I guess if you had to nail the one thing, I think it all was dependent on the effects. And the effects for me are pretty close to flawless. Like, again, like some have probably slightly aged a little bit, but I think that's also because we were born in a certain era where we're now, our expectations when it comes to special effects are a little bit, we expect more, and the technology's got better and better. And like you said, there's the use of CGI where they can mask other bits and pieces, but these effects, and like you said, like, they were under the pump. They worked so hard to do so well at them. And then some of them they only really had one go at.
Yeah.
And unfortunately it didn't work, and they'd have to reset up and spend a lot of hours and time and reset up shots. But like you said, like even to get the W amputee and then do a mask of the what character was why have I got a mental blank of Dr. Copper? Was it Copper?
Yes.
Yeah, Dr. Copper. And getting the amputee to have the face to look like, so that arms come off, and like, but for a long time, I wouldn't, if I hadn't watched the documentary, I wouldn't have even known that. I just would have gone, oh, I don't know how they did it, but yeah, it's not even Dr. Copper. It's someone else with a mask of Dr. Copper. Oh, that's crazy.
It's amazing. It's amazing. Bad.
Interesting.
This might be the first film where I genuinely can't think of a bad. I don't know if I've got one. I don't know if I've got anything in this movie, and the multiple times I've watched it, that I get to the end, I'm like, that movie fucking rocks. But, and maybe that's because this is the first one we've done that isn't an actual sequel. It's a remake, and maybe inherently in sequels, what you get is an inferior product. And perhaps with remakes, there is always the hope, because you're not beholden to anything that came before. You want to reimagine and remake and honor certainly what came before, but you don't have to carry on, or in the opposite direction, completely ignore the film that led you here.
I think it's, I guess, not that I can't even, you know what, to be totally honest, I don't even know if I've fully sat down and seen the original Howard Hawke film, The Thing from Another Planet. So even comparing them, I couldn't do that. I mean, I'm just going to say, well, I'm sure The Thing is the superior version of that idea. But you're right. I think this is definitely one of the harder ones. And I mean, this is a tedious bad at best. But I think one of the things I feel like, and I think most normal humans would feel this same thing, it's always hard when you see a dog or a cat or some sort of pet in distress or something. So that's why this movie's so good, because that escalation of these dogs like shitting themselves, like what the fuck is happening in this cage, and just like even the fact that they were able, like, it's kind of a good and a bad, because like the way they were able to have the dogs look so scared and panicked trying to rip out of that cage to get away from whatever the fuck they were dealing with. but still, even then, even though I know some of it was puppetry, it did feel like, oh, I don't really want to see the dogs getting torn apart or anything like that. Like, yeah, give me a human, like let the humans get ripped apart, but not the dogs. But
yeah, not the dogs.
Yeah.
That's full on.
but I mean,
I guess
that's
the
pretty
only-
tedious.
the only bad is to flip it and say the bad is that the audiences and the critics at the time didn't appreciate it. Yeah, I don't have a bad for the film. I have a bad for the film's response. It's bad that
Yeah.
people didn't appreciate how good this film was at the time. What about ugly? Is there an ugly in this movie? I can think of one, and I think it's probably the only one that I can think of, and we already touched on it earlier in the episode. But the only ugly I can think of is just the effects of the spaceship at the start.
Yeah.
For all and that the only reason I would say that that's my ugly is just because of the flip side of how good the rest of the practical effects are. And the spaceship, whilst it looks great, I can't fault the design. I think it looks good. I think it is well made.
Yeah.
I think it suffers, from what a lot of 80s films suffer from, is that it is an analog film in a digital world, and it just doesn't translate.
Yeah, look, it's really sad. Like I said, like, if anyone listened to this podcast, and I don't know when the last time you saw the documentary, but I do feel bad. Again, I'm pretty sure that her name's Susan Turner. I couldn't find her on IMDb.
It is Susan Turner, yeah.
Yes, and she just, even in this documentary, she spends like 3 or 4 minutes showing the actual model, because she's still got it, how she made the lights and how it rotated, how it was lit up by globes, and how she used copper pieces instead of styrofoam because the copper, and actually like made total logical sense. And the amount of work she put into that ship to be the miniature or to be shot for that scene. And it was kind of explained how it was done. And they did 4 passes. They put the light on in one pass, and they did this, but the other pass. And I just think, out of, it's all that work, it just feels like, it doesn't look good, or it at least doesn't hold up anymore for me. So it's kind of a letdown, and it's kind of like, to think someone put all that effort in for it to look shit kind of is a little bit disappointing. I mean,
it's tough. It's tough, and I feel bad.
But having said that, the effect of The Thing, John Carpenter's The Thing, the reveal of the title sequence, and the way that was even done seems so sort of kind of silly in this day and age, but it works and it looks fantastic.
It really puts you in a certain place, in a space of mind straight away. I think it's fantastic. Look, one thing I just want to quickly, I know we're wrapping up, but just quickly touch on that we didn't touch on, is the writer of this. When we talked about that, John Carpenter didn't write this. Bill Lancaster. Yeah. Just a quick shout out to Bill Lancaster, because he is a writer who's forgotten to time, because he only wrote 3 movies. He wrote Bad News Bears. He wrote He wrote Bad News Bears Go to Japan, and that was it. And that was because sadly he passed away when he was only 40 years old.
Oh wow!
So he didn't go on to do anything.
So what year was that then?
He passed away in 1997. So he did have, like, after The Thing in 82, he had like plenty of time to write more, but didn't. I don't know the reason why, if it was health or if it was because it was a bomb and he couldn't get work.
Okay. I wonder when the documentary is filmed, because I was under the belief that documentary is filmed roughly 20 years on, because they say 15 to 20 years. So I wonder if some of his stuff, because he's in the documentary, so I wonder if his. Yeah, I was going to say it must be archival, or maybe they did film it for Laserdisc at the time, but I thought it was more the 20th anniversary in because sorry, not Blu-ray, DVD was The Thing that was coming out. Maybe 97, maybe it was recorded just before he died. That would make 15 years, 1997. So it's possible that, because he's definitely in it, and he does talk about the original story not being. He didn't rate it that much, but he said it is in the sci-fi circles. It's a short story that's sort of well regarded, but he doesn't think it was much, that amazing. But that's that's sad to know.
He has a cameo in The Thing as one of the Norwegians. And if you look at a picture of him, you can look him up on the, Google him or IMDb. He looks like a Norwegian. He's got like long blonde hair and a very Norwegian-esque face with the chin and the nose, very strong looking dude. But yeah, just I didn't want to let the whole episode go by without bringing him up, because I feel like history is forgetting him. And he wrote. I haven't seen Bad News Bears Go Japan, but Bad News Bears and The Thing are both friggin' great movies and really well written movies. And I feel like we may have lost a great writer too soon there.
Well, I'm glad you brought him up too, and it's a slight deviation, but someone else that's kind of interesting that actually played a Norwegian was actually Dick Warlock, who is Michael Myers in Halloween 2.
Yeah. Well, look, if we're talking Norwegians, one of the other Norwegians is the one who starts out shooting the gun at the dog. Is let me see, Larry Franco,
yes,
who worked as a production manager in this film, but he's also Kurt Russell's brother-in-law in real life. So the Norwegians, considering how little they get to do in this film, pretty interesting bunch of guys. I
should have done some research, but I wonder if the Norwegians actually speak proper Norwegian as well. That was the other thing I was just wondering, because I know.
God, I hope so. God, I hope they're not just speaking gobbledygook. I'd be really upset if they were just.
I can't remember. Well, I was going to say, I feel like I've lost track of the movies where they do speak gobbledygook pretty much, but I feel like maybe they did have someone that was speaking decent Norwegian on this, but I'd have to get it checked. I probably shouldn't, because I know a little bit of Norwegian as well. So, but it could be just like, again, Norwegian words just thrown together and mean jack shit.
Oh boy! All right, let's go to the bakery.
Let's go to the bakery.
I'll go first, because I know exactly what this is. This is somebody has baked a perfect apple pie. Oh, no, someone has baked a really good apple pie. And people have enjoyed it for years. And it's like, hey, this is Hawksy's apple pie. Come get one of Hawksy's apple pies. And it almost becomes a bit manufactured in that, you can get Hawksy's apple pies at the supermarket and at the petrol station. You can get it anywhere. And someone has looked at it one day and gone, I'm going to go back to the actual recipe. I'm going to go back to the words on the page in the recipe, and I'm going to have a look at what this really started out as and see what I can do with it. And what they do is they go, oh, I get what this is, and I get the extra ingredients that I can add to this recipe to make it not the mainstream palatable version of this, but the superior version of this in every way. And while it may, not everyone wants to eat an apple pie that has, cayenne pepper in it, but those who truly understand what cayenne pepper brings to an apple pie, that the extra level of taste and flavor and the depths and the complexities and the notes that you get when you add that in, they will really understand this is superior version. And that is what John Carpenter's The Thing is versus Howard Hawks's The Thing from Another World. Is someone looked at the recipe, they went back to the original book, and they went, I know how to make this better. I'm not going to make it for everyone, but I'm going to make it better. That's what this apple.
I sort of thought roughly that was where you're going to go. I thought you were going to more say, oh, the recipe was there, but Hawksy just cut a few corners, but still had made a great product that everyone loved for years.
He was just trying too hard to mainstream.
Someone was dusting off the old books and found the original recipe. Go, hang on, let's make the original recipe, and it was far superior than the.
But even this, even this recipe, even John Carpenter's The Thing is, I think, superior to the short story as well. I think it adds elements, it adds things that were there to be done, but never really thought of before. And in every iteration, things change. But we saw in the prequel, it didn't quite stick the landing. And we're almost certainly, apparently Blumhouse is currently looking into doing a remake again. Based on the original story and the expanded elements of the story that Carpenter and Hawks both ignored. There is more going on in the story that got ignored. So that's the hook that they've got for this. Is no, we're not remake. Just like John Carpenter's like, I didn't remake Howard Hawks' The Thing from Another World. Jason Blum is like, I'm not making John Carpenter's The Thing. I'm making the short story Who Goes There. So we shall see. But
Mm.
I do think that, this is a lightning in a bottle film.
Mm. Oh, 100%. I would have to, I'm not even going to I'm not going to give you a bakery analogy. I'm going to support yours. I think you're right. I think it's, you can have your normal apple pie. Like you said, it's great. It's enjoyable. But like you said, it's a bit like Sara Lee's apple pie you had for years. You get at the supermarket. It's a great product, but sometimes you just want to go into a bakery where they make it fresh. And like you said, there might be a little bit more love put into it, or a little bit more of an ingredients, a bit more cinnamon, or whatever it is they add to it. It's just a little bit different, a little bit more fresher, or and it's just different and better, or different in a good way, that it's better, and it's great experience. Yeah, I'm not going to really add anything more to that, but I will circle back, because I feel like there's so much to talk about this film, and there's so much I feel like we've talked about, and then there's probably a million other things we've missed. The other thing that I remember when I first saw this movie, and you start reading up, and again, going back to the early 2000s, internet, it's a big thing. Obviously, started to really boom, and people started having access to modems and dial-up network, and IMDb was a big thing for if you're a movie buff and you were trying to learn about these movies. And I've got IMDb open every time we do a podcast anyway. I'm, no offense, don't rate it as highly as I did once, back then. But IMDb and all the documents, and when you read up all these sort of trivial bits about this movie, the other thing that was quite prevalent at the time was the allegory of the whole blood testing, and the whole thing was the AIDS epidemic in America, worldwide, but mainly in America. And it was kind of like this, nudge, nudge, wink, wink. And personally, I don't think that was something John Carpenter was consciously thinking of. But it's funny how people have always sort of looked at it as that thing, that paranoia and blood, and who's got it, we don't know, and it's a big ugly unknown out there. And the thing is just this giant AIDS monster, pretty much.
And again, I think that speaks to what I was talking before about this fitting in that same category as Shakespeare, in that it is such a well done and such a well constructed story that the themes and the ideas are universal and can be applied to a lot of things. Like, you can look at this as a movie about the AIDS epidemic, and it completely landing, because it is about a bunch of people who are terrified that the person sitting next to them has got the thing, the unnamed, unexplainable. You could also, by most modern standards, you could look at this as a COVID movie.
Yeah, 100%.
Like, bunch of people all trapped inside who can't go out, but one of them might have the thing,
Yeah.
And it is, or you could also look at this as a communist movie. One of them might be the thing. There might be the red under the bed. Like, it speaks to so much of what human beings do, because it is what human beings do in these situations. They don't resort to reason and science and clever, calm deduction and thinking. They resort to panic and fear and finger pointing, and ultimately, weapons and disaster. It's a sad but true indictment of human. McCready really is the voice of reason, and even he is pretty crazy for a lot of this movie. The doctor starts to become unhinged. Everyone becomes unhinged. So yeah, I think you could absolutely watch this movie and being like, well, it was made in 1982, and there's a lot of talk about blood and the fear of the blood being tainted, and it's an AIDS movie, and be like, yes, but also it is just humans, just how human beings behave. Man, what a movie! I love it. It's in my all-time top 10. I think it's.
We should talk about our top 10 at some point. I know it's not necessarily sequels and remakes, but I'm glad you actually brought that up, because I know a few years ago, and I can't remember if it was Bros or someone from Chatflix or just another fan that was a movie fan, and one of these things that happens when you're on social media, whether it's Facebook or Instagram, but generally Facebook, someone will tag you saying your 10 best movies, and I'm going to tag Angus today, and this is my favorite movie for this reason or whatever. I know a few years ago I did do a top 10 and it was bloody excruciating trying to pick the definitive thing, but I sort of tried to pick things that, of course, I rewatched quite a bit, but also definitely changed the way I looked at cinema, but also constantly can still always go on and enjoy and never be bored of. And also, yeah, for different reasons had an impact on my life or for whatever reason. And I feel like I had the thing in there, but or maybe just missed out. I think it might have been the one that just missed the top 10, but was in that sort of 15 or so that I bundled together and then finally had to lock down a top 10. And
yeah, I mean, I always say that my top 10 films is 15 movies long because there's kind of like a floating 5 that can rotate in and out in time. But I also, I tend to think that like my top 10 favorite movies are not the same list as the top 10 best movies I've ever seen.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
But I do think there are some films that are in that Venn diagram where they sit in the middle. And I think The Thing might be one of them. I think The Thing sits in the list of, it is one of my top 10 favorite movies. It is also one of the top 10 best films I've ever seen. For largely all the reasons we've just spent the last hour and a bit talking about. It's great. It's a great film. It's a film that, whilst you may not always think it's one of those ones you don't think you could chuck it on any time and watch it because you're like, oh, I don't know if I'm in the mood for The Thing today. But if you did, I'd say 99 times out of 100, you'd be like, oh yeah, man, I am in the mood for The Thing. I'm glad I put this on. This is great. This is really, really, like, I'm digging it so hard. So yeah, I think definitely my top 10 list. We should definitely do a special episode where we bounce back and forth our top 10s and see what's on there. See if any sequels make the list. I'd be interested to see if either of us had any.
Well, see, okay, without trying
times.
to string this episode out any longer, but that's the other great debate, because I have seen, when I see people do lists, especially if they really love like A New Hope or Empire, they just put down, well, say it was 4th on their list, I'll just put down the original Star Wars trilogy because they can't split them all, and it's kind of like a little bit of a cheat. And I kind of am a bit the same because I love Empire. I know in that top 10 list, I just put Empire. But then some people are like, oh, well, you don't like the other Star Wars movies. They're not even in your top 10. You kind of go, ah. And the same with Back to the Future. It's kind of like, I love Back to the Future 1 and 2 almost equally the same, and 3, no. But it's like, but I'll just put Back to the Future in. I won't bother with 2 or vice versa. It's kind of like, the same with Scream 1 and 2. Like, it's like, I would probably put 2 just in ahead of it. But people are like, well, you got Scream 2 in, but you don't have Scream. So I think it's funny, even with sequels or trilogies or groupings of films, like, how do you navigate them into your top, and are you cheating if you put, say a trilogy of films as just the one? Because I know a lot of people do it. I've seen a lot of lists recently when people have shared top 10 movies. They'll have their top 10 movies, and at 8th might be the Scream trilogy or the Lord of the Rings trilogy, whatever. They can't split those movies.
To me. Unacceptable. You can't put a trilogy in one slot. You pick one. You coward. You pick one film, and bad luck.
Sophie's choice. Yeah.
Bad luck. And hey, look, that's what this whole podcast is all about. Sometimes the sequel is inextricably linked to the original. Sometimes it is better. Sometimes it is worse, but it is a different movie. And that's what we're here to talk about and figure out is what makes it different and better and worse, and what makes it worthwhile existing. But I will not stand for a world where people get given 10 slots, and in one slot we'll put 3 films as one film. I don't care if they're a trilogy. If there's a credit at the end of the movie before the credit at the start of the next one, you're not watching one movie. That's 2 movies.
Yes.
That's inexcusable. You get in the bin. You get in the bin, you dirty film pig. You get in the bin. Not allowed.
Don't be so greedy. So as we wind this episode, I guess we talked about our first remake film, and I guess when we think about sequels, all we really want from a sequel, and as we discuss these films, we just want them to, they don't have to exactly be as good as the original movie they're following, but we want them to be as close to, or if not as good, or give you something new enough, or bring back some of your favorite characters and all that. The remake, the idea for me, a remake, a remake should be better than its predecessor in a lot of ways. And why I say that, or at least my theory is, if something is being remade, the justification for me personally, I think, something like Jaws should never be remade. Back to the Future should never be remade. And a lot of these movies, I can't speak for Jaws. I don't know if they've ever talked about doing Jaws remakes. I know they've obviously done sequels, and we've talked about Jaws too. But there's always been rumors and people definitely at studios that have wanted to do Back to the Future, and there's been other movies, and I know you've talked about some earlier before, that they've wanted to remake, and you're talking about The Thing maybe getting remade again. For me, if a movie is so good and so successful to the point that it's almost timeless and it's classic, it should never be remade. You cannot. I just don't think there's enough there to even bother. But if the original property, similar to the story not being exactly the same when Howard Hawks did it, and whether he couldn't really replicate the book as much as he wanted to or whatever, if there's a property, a great idea, a seed of an idea, a great story that was attempted to be made as a film and bombed, not because it was crap, not because it was good and people didn't go see it. If it was really badly executed, bad actors, bad director, or a director got fired and the effects were bad, if the movie was almost like so bad that no one ever really saw it, but you could go back and someone could actually go, hang on, that source material is really good, but that first effort was disaster. No one's ever seen that. We can go and we'll make this a good movie. Then that's, for me, that's a justification for a remake. And there's no reason why that can't be successful and can't be already better than the original. But the problem is they love their IP. They like going back to the well. And that's, I know that's a long-winded sort of thing to say, but I just think at least this thing, I think, succeeded on so many levels, and that's why this will be one of the better remakes we'll ever see, I think.
I couldn't agree more. I think this knocks out of the park in every possible way. It should be the example of, if you're going to remake a film, what you're looking for. If you want to remake a movie, watch The Thing from Another World, and then watch The Thing, and then look at all the things you can do. And if you don't think you can do that, if you don't think you can offer that to a film you're remaking, leave it the hell alone, man. Move on. Come up with something new, or hey, do a sequel.
And on that, not all remakes suck.
Sequels suck, fans.
By definition alone, they're inferior films.
I almost remake a quick warning.
Sequels suck.
This episode is
Sequels suck.
spoilers.